So that's basically the title of today's event, Sustainable Development Goals, Transforming Our World, starting with Ireland. Because these goals are not about the rest of the world, they're about us. And they're about us in our villages, in our homes, in our communities, in our government, in our civil service, our local government and everything else. That's where these goals should be owned and should be developed. And as you can see from that, the Environment Pillar, working with Dochas, has brought this production together. And as I understand it, we're being funded by Beyond 2015, which is an international coalition of NGOs. So today's event is at least part funded by them and part funded by ourselves in the Environmental Pillar. This is our objectives for today. They're on the programme, but I'll just go through them because it's important to remember what we're trying to do. These are our objectives for today specifically. We're here to raise awareness and support for the SDGs, which I've already mentioned, and to focus on the responsibility of Ireland and what Ireland can do to progress these Sustainable Development Goals. As I've said before, and I want to keep emphasising it, these are our goals. Our government has signed up to them, our Taoiseach has signed up to them on our behalf. Our President was there in New York with the Taoiseach, supporting the whole concept of the Sustainable Development Goals. Our civil society has largely signed up to them already, but we need to take action on them. The other reason why we're here today is to seek commitment from the individual participants, so you, in other words, to work on specifically on 4 of the goals, which we've highlighted here around the room. We originally were planning to have a longer event with 8 goals, but that didn't come off in the end. So we're having 4 of the 17 goals, which we specifically selected for their environmental content. But actually, most of the goals have an environmental dimension, some of them more than others. And there is no distinction, in fact, in sustainable development between environmental, social and economic in any case. And one of the other objectives is to promote a coalition of civil society for promoting the SDGs into the future, called at the moment called the Post-2015 Coalition, but that's just a name. But it's basically bringing people together. We're very keen for people to sign up to that coalition, to join in with that activity for the future. It's a 15-year programme. It's a long haul. We need lots of energy and lots of direction from the beginning, and we need to get people connected into this. So everything they do is tied in with these goals. And finally, to make sure that Ireland delivers on its responsibilities re these goals, and that's obviously individually, again, communally, locally, regionally and nationally, and with our governments and with our civil society all connected into it. So I welcome you all here, which I should have done at the beginning, but I'm welcoming you all now. And slides are obviously not in the right order. They're in the order I put them in, but they're not in the right order. So I want to welcome you all here because your participation today is a very welcome sign. There's people across government departments here. We have people from Department of Taoiseach, Department of the Environment, Department of Agriculture, the EPA. We have people from local government. We have people from various organisations, including farming organisations, who've taken an interest in the, obviously, particularly in the first of the goals we're going to be talking about, number 2. But we want to go forward from this into a wider objective, which is actually engaging with all those groups, all different levels of society, as laid out there. And I particularly wanted to pinpoint one thing, which is the public participation networks. These are a new entity at a local level. These are all the community groups in a local area, local community, environmental and social inclusion groups coming together under the umbrella of the public participation network. And they have to develop a wellbeing statement over the next year or so. And these goals tie in so perfectly into the wellbeing statements. It's an obvious vehicle for developing them. So this is our agenda for this morning. These are the 4 goals we're going to be looking at, and you have it on your on the programmes. The 4 goals are listed there, and you've also been given, according to your choices, a separate piece of paper with a more detailed breakdown of what the goals contain, depending on which workshop you're going to go into. Excuse me, we'll deal with that later. Well, I just want to do very, very briefly, just to tell you what the environmental pillar is, because some of you may know and some of you may not. Okay, it's just going to be a couple of slides. 28 member organisations, they're all national environmental organisations. We have roughly 35,000 individual members, and that's the list of the organisations. I'm not going to read them out. But you can check out on our website, www.environmentalpillar.ie, for the details of all the groups. So why is the environmental pillar involved in this process? Well, it's probably obvious, but I just have to restate it. I mean, our perspective on the way things are is this. Human society evolved and is entirely reliant on the natural environment for its existence and survival. We evolved as a species out of a lot of other species in the particular way that we did. We've created superstructures around our worlds which have alienated us from the natural environment to a degree, particularly if you're living in conurbations and cities and so on. The natural environment is no longer on your doorstep, it's no longer something you immediately interact with. And that makes it very difficult sometimes for people to realise that actually that natural environment is the one thing that keeps them alive. It's not about paychecks in the end, although that's important clearly. It's actually about where your clean water comes from, where your food is grown, the soil that the food is grown in, the oceans where we get marine resources from, and so on. So essentially, we have to begin to realise that our economic system is something we've invented, which we can change to suit our needs, which we can change to suit which operates in a way which doesn't damage the environment. At the moment, our economic system drives the growth agenda, which in the end will kill us. It's as simple as that. If we keep on operating the way we're going, that's what will happen. So this is our model of the way things are, okay? It's the environment encircles and includes everything else. We are part of that environment. We're not separate from it. There's not something out there we have to deal with. We are it. It is us. Society is part of the environment, and the economy is part of society. That's the hierarchy. It's not the other way around. If you look at the media, you'd assume that the economy is the most important thing on the planet. It isn't. It's certainly the one thing that catches the headlines because it immediately affects our pockets and so on, but it isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is the natural environment, and without that, we're banjaxed. So, that's my little speak. And now I want to introduce to you a good friend, but also a brilliant guy who works at the moment with Dochas. He's the director of Dochas, has been for the last 13 years. He's moving on shortly. He'll hate me for doing this, but he's moving on to be the head of communications information at Oris and Uachtaráin in the near future. So congratulations to Hans, and you're very welcome. So Hans, the floor is yours.
Hello, yeah, so my name is Hans and I head up Dochas, and Dochas is the network of the development NGOs here in Ireland. So we've been working with IEN and our environmental pillar for a number of years now to talk about this sort of stuff, and so I'm really delighted to see that there's lots of you who have come here today to talk to us and talk to each other about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and what they mean for us. I was told it's always good to start a presentation with a question, so I don't know about that, but I thought I'll try that out. So here's my question. Have you ever thought that when you send a postcard to your sister in France or your family in New Jersey or something, how it gets delivered? Why would the postman in another country deliver your postcard or your letter when you haven't paid for it? Any ideas?
Reciprocity.
Very good. There's actually, and how? Where does the reciprocity come from? Yes. Now there's a treaty that actually regulates this. One of the oldest international treaties, and you've never heard of, but you're probably making use of every day. It's the I have to check now. The Treaty of Berne, 1874. So the point is, there are international agreements that make our lives easier. There's another one more close to the heart of the environmental movement, the Montreal Protocol. Anybody know what that is?
CFCs.
Very good. So that was 1987. Again, it was an example of how the global community came together and said, look, we have a problem. We need to do something together. It's bigger than any of us, so only if we work together can we fix it. And in that case, there was a remarkably short amount of time between, the definition of the problem and the definition of the solution. We've other international, well, this one isn't a bad example because the Dublin regulation, which we've heard about a lot, is actually EU law. So, but the point is, there are international treaties, and they are really important. And we never really talk about them unless they are a problem. But they are the fundamental building block of the international society that we've built on Earth. They actually avoid international politics being sort of the law of the jungle. Small countries like Ireland actually have a chance to be part of international decision making, thanks to the international system of treaties that we've built. Now, the most famous treaties obviously are the ones that are legally binding, but there are also ones that are politically binding. And it's very easy to mock them and very easy to criticize them because they deal in really tiny millimeter type progress, if at all. Yeah. I've just come back for the UN, and I think that's why Michael and co have invited me. They should have invited Oshi because he was there as well. But at the UN this weekend, the SDGs were formally adopted. And going to the UN is a really interesting experience because on the one hand, it's frustrating. It's incredibly bureaucratic. And some of the people in the highest jobs in the UN didn't get that job because they're so competent. They got it because they're the right nationality. Or they had spent enough time in the system that it was their time to be promoted. And you see it. There's a lot of inefficiencies. And at the same time, when you walk around there, you can't help but saying, this is really cool. This is our world government. And like any government, there's a lot of things wrong with it, but actually we have it, and we have to make it work. And it actually does work at times. Why am I saying all of this? Because we as the development NGOs, we rely heavily on one aspect, and Oshin called it reciprocity. We like to call it also solidarity, cooperation, consensus. We want people on this planet to work together for a better world and to alleviate issues that we have together. So we rely on international agreements. And we have one that we've been very proud of for the last, I was going to say 15 years, but that's not true. But in the year 2000, when, do you remember the year 2000? The Y2K, do you remember that? We were all worried about that, didn't actually happen. But we were all really excited about going into a new century and a new millennium. And we weren't the only ones. Our world leaders were as well. And they came together in New York and said, wouldn't it be great if we marked the beginning of this millennium to really rethink some of our approach to the biggest problems we have on Earth. So they came together in New York and they adopted a declaration, completely non-binding declaration. So easy to forget. And actually at the time, most of us went, oh yeah, that's fine. World leaders make declarations every day of the week. So we ignored it. But then a few smart people in the UN said, you know what, if we took the bones of this declaration and turned it into something that you could actually measure and hold people to account, wouldn't that be great? It would give us some sort of a framework that we could check on in progress. So they decided, and this is completely undemocratic and arbitrarily, they decided on 8 goals that they found in that declaration essentially, and they translated it into 8 goals and they put a bit of measurement on it. And these were called the Millennium Development Goals. And at the time, most of us, again, we didn't really notice until about 4 or 5 years later when we started the Make Poverty History campaign. Again, hopefully most of you remember that. And it really got traction. And essentially these Millennium Development Goals gave us a framework, a recipe for international cooperation on what the issues that the Dochas membership works on: the hunger, poverty, disease, education, those sort of things. And 15 years later, you have to say they were remarkable. They gave us the most successful anti-poverty movement in history. For the first time, the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, gave us an agreement between all of the countries on Earth, or all of those anyway that are in the UN. So, well, these are the things that really matter. And essentially there were 8 goals, 7 of which were the responsibility of developing countries, and the last one was the responsibility of the richer countries. And it worked. So, I have loads of statistics on how the MDGs really made a difference. But we also have a little newspaper that is on your seat, which gives you sort of micro stories to illustrate that actually since 2000 we have halved extreme poverty. We have halved the numbers of women dying in childbirth. We have reduced the death of number of people dying as a result of malaria by a quarter. And we have brought safe drinking water to 200 million people. We've lifted 700 million people out of extreme poverty. So these are the sort of statistics that when you say them, they go in one ear and out the other. But it really, we have to say, the MDGs have made a phenomenal difference. But they were flawed. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't in the MDGs, and a lot of things were essentially about numbers. So in 2010, the UN organized a summit and said, well, how are we doing on this on these MDGs? And all of these criticism came up, and all of the progress was being discussed. And then in 2012 in Rio, a couple of the environmental pillar organizations were in Rio to look at progress on since Rio 1992. So and basically the UN came to the conclusion that yes, this is working, this stuff, this anti-poverty stuff, but we're not doing so well on the other dimensions of sustainable development. And so then the idea was born that we should really have a new framework to succeed the MDGs, to kick on in after 2015, because that was the deadline for the MDGs. And these were the where have we gone? Sustainable Development Goals. I think they're on your sheet as well. So they were formally approved this weekend. And also one thing, like again on the front page of our paper, it's we have to, as Irish people, we have to be very proud of the role that Ireland played in bringing these things about. For the last 2 years, essentially Irish diplomats have led the negotiation process that led to the articulation of these new goals. So and I think there's a really important number of differences between these new goals and the ones that we have been working with for the last 15 years. First was the process. As I said, the MDGs were designed by a couple, I think they were essentially men, a group of men in a windowless office somewhere up in the UN. Whereas these goals are the results of 3 years of consultation and discussion, public discussion, and a discussion process where we as civil society organizations have been part and parcel of from the start and until the very end. Civil society was part of the negotiations as a peer, not as a sort of a onlooker. And that's really important. But the other really important thing is, as I said, the MDGs were essentially a recipe for poor countries. These sustainable development goals, they are based on the principle that all of us live in developing countries. No country on earth is developed. We all have to continuously build a better society where we live. And certainly there's enough challenges in countries like Ireland as well to say that we are a developing country. And thirdly, so this is a universal agenda, is what we call it. Thirdly, these sustainable development goals are based on a principle also that they cannot be considered to have been achieved if they haven't been achieved for everyone. So I said with the MDGs, we said, we've reduced the number of deaths by half or whatever. That means the other half has been left behind. So with the SDGs, we're saying, no, they cannot be, you cannot tick the box unless it's ticked for every part of society, every segment of society. And then, so this is where I finally come to the point that Michael wanted me to make here in my introductions. These sustainable development goals, they are providing a recipe that we've all agreed on, and now it needs to be implemented. And we have 15 years. Now, to you and me, 15 years sounds a lot. That's actually very short time for the type of stuff that we're saying we want to achieve by 2030. So we need to get our skates on and really start putting some measures in place to implement these goals. Now, what does that mean? And so that's the question for you today. What does the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals mean here in Ireland? We have some ideas, and we've written smart papers and dumb papers on it, but we've articulated our ideas quite a few times. 2 minutes, I'm needed. But essentially what we want is more of this, more debate in Ireland. Okay, how do we interpret the SDGs? What do they mean for us? So we've already written to the Taoiseach, and we've said that we need a debate in the Oireachtas about the Sustainable Development Goals in Ireland. We need an implementation plan. We can't just go, oh yeah, well we've signed it, job done. No, we need to put serious measures in place. We need to start thinking about how we monitor the progress towards the goals as well. And again, I think we have a chance of doing something radically different from what we have been doing before. So the subject matter of the SDGs is potentially transformative, but also the way we measure progress could be potentially transformative. We need to put power in the hands of our citizens to let them determine whether we're making progress or not, to help them keep governments to account, hold our own government to account. And we need to put some money to this as well. So my first message today is also that in a couple of weeks' time, on the 13th of October, government will announce the budget for next year. This is going to be the first test of whether we're serious when we say we are committed to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. So, I think, thank you very much, Michael and Co, for inviting me and for giving this event the title that you've given. It's Transforming Our World, and starting with Ireland. And that's exactly the sort of approach that we want to do. These SDGs are potentially revolutionary and can really change the way we do business in our life. We do all need to put an effort to it. It's not just an issue of leaving this to governments. We as civil society organizations need to be involved. We need to get private sector organizations involved. We need to get ordinary citizens involved. And secondly, it's not just a question of this is stuff out there, the responsibility of the Department of Foreign Affairs. No, this is a responsibility for all of us. So, 2 questions for you today. What do you think the SDGs mean for Ireland? And what are you going to do to help them a reality? Thank you very much.